Hi, my name is Jarek Fernando, and I will be presenting my Human Child Development Project that will be covering chapters 1 through 6 of the book. The first chapter we will be covering will be focusing on Erik Erikson's psychosocial theory. This theory says that people are driven by the need to excel at certain areas of our lives. Over our lives, we experience 8 developmental stages of our lives from infancy to elderly age, whereupon a crisis is faced to overcome. The first crisis in our lives during infancy is that of trust versus mistrust. At this time, babies learn from their caregivers that they can be trusted. This trust can be established by being given responsive and caring behavior from parental figures in regards to a baby's needs. If infants are not given this adequate form of nurturance and their basic needs are failed to be met, they are at risk for developing a deeper sense of mistrust for people in the world throughout life. Thankfully, I have had positive role models and caregivers in my own life, such as my parents, siblings, and grandparents. It is because of them that I was able to succeed and overcome this developmental crisis stage. Another crisis we are expected to face occurs during adolescence, usually between ages 12 to 18, known as identity versus identity confusion. During this journey of self-discovery, many adolescents explore different aspects of themselves to answer the question of who they are, sometimes by taking on different roles or ideas to discover their adult identity. By my own experience, after coming to terms with my sexuality, I came out to my supportive family and friends and attended my first Pride the year gay marriage was legalized. Furthermore, as a means to better connect with my ethnic culture, I pushed myself to join and become an active member of SJSU's Akbayan organization, which is essentially the Filipino club here on campus that fosters a sense of education and belonging of people within the Filipinx community. Success in this field leads to a stronger sense of identity and conviction in one's values and beliefs. Failure to overcome this stage leads to insecurity and confusion with one's role later in life. Lastly, the final developmental stage I will be talking about as I am now entering this time of my life is that of intimacy versus isolation, which occurs from early adulthood until as late as one's 40s. Only after finding our self-identity are we more inclined to share our lives with another. In my personal life, my boyfriend Norris and I were able to find each other only because we were able to find ourselves prior to becoming a couple. And I couldn't be happier because of that. Next, in Chapter 2, I will be focusing on the theory of genotype and its effects on the environment proposed by Sandra Scar and Kathleen McCartney. This theory states that genotype and environment make considerable contributions to our development and that we moreover create our own environments to an extent as a result of our genotypes. The first form of this theory is that of passive genotype to environment effects, where parents of children provide them with both their genes and their environment. By my own personal example, I have my dad to thank for my skills at cooking. As this theory helps to explain, I have a gift at cooking not only because my father gave me the necessary environment for this craft, such as access to the kitchen, ingredients to experiment with, and cooking utensils to utilize, but also because half of my genes I received from him carried a genetic makeup that determined my heightened capabilities. Next, the second form of the genotype to environment theory deals with the evocative genotype, which results when one's inherited characteristics elicit responses from others in their environment. For instance, when I was younger, my dad observed me being fascinated with reading books. As a result of his observation, he facilitated this inclination by taking me to the library, as well as buying a subscription to National Geographic magazine for me to read during a weekly basis. The last form of this theory of active genotype occurs when people actively seek out environments that correspond to their genotypic characteristics. In my own experience, for instance, becoming a more highly sociable person in my years propelled me to seek out more social and community membership and leadership positions throughout my life, such as through school sports, class elections, event planning, and public speaking. In Chapter 3, we will delve into a neonate's need for social and emotional care that blankets the natural life necessities of protection and nutrition. To start off, we have the task of the bonding relationship, which is the concept that the first few minutes and hours after birth are exceptionally important for the mother and child. Personally speaking, My mother recounted to me of how desperate and anxious she was to have me in her arms immediately after birth, and how she was thereafter hesitant to let go. Other than when I was asked to be examined by doctors or coddled by relatives, my mother refused to relinquish me from her arms, as she was adamant to let everyone know that I was hers, which, fun fact, is what my name roughly translates into in our native language of Tagalog. Experts usually dedicate three distinct forms of infant outbursts labeled as either fussing, angry, or pained crying. A fussing period in which crying is distinguished by small, mildly distressed whimpers, often paired with later full-blown outbursts, was usually found in me when my diapers were soiled or if I felt too hot or too cold. My angry cries, characterized by large, full-blown exclamations, were less frequent, but apparently only happened at times whenever I was left alone or needed to eat. Finally, the only time my family vividly remembered an instance where I had a pained cry, where a large intake of breath followed by a strong outburst, was when my older sister accidentally hit the top of my head against the sharp corners of a low-level table. Maybe that accident explains a lot of the reason why I am the way I am today. My parents used a variety of different methods to stop me from crying. Although my mom told me I barely ever did cry, when I did, she told me all that I was needed of her was either carrying me or feeding me, which still works today as food is usually the answer to all my problems. However, if those two didn't work, I could usually be calmed down by cuddling stuffed animals or by being taken out on a car ride where I could explore the world through the window before falling asleep. Infant health is a complex and wide-ranged issue that includes many different subtopics in regards to cultural, economic, and social contexts. The introduction of soft foods to an infant's life welcomes the intake of nutrients without the need for breast milk for the first time. My first introduction with solid foods was through a light mixture of plain oatmeal mixed with a bit of water to ease the foreign experience. Soon after becoming more accustomed, my family allowed me to continue to fully transition pretty quickly and develop a keen taste for savory foods such as Vienna sausage or buttered rice. Coming from a Filipino family that resettled in California when my parents were both around the ages of 12, they also brought along with them cultural customs from my grandparents that they would use later in life to raise me and my siblings with. Namely, they practiced leg straightening by extending my legs gently and wrapping them with a blanket in order to prevent bow-leggedness in myself later in life. Another ritual they practiced was gently rubbing the circumference of my head to prevent the flatness and to ensure my head was round when I grew up. A major health issue I had to go through as an infant was a clogging of my tear ducts when I was young. Apparently, the corners of my eyes would regularly be disrupted by a blockage of hardened pus and tears that my family feared would negatively impact my vision. Thankfully, after consultation and intense care with healthcare professionals and medical attention provided by a first world country and afforded by a middle class family, I was able to overcome this physical challenge, even though my eyes still suck at seeing to this day. Just as in infancy, the world around a toddler includes their more prominent relationships with siblings, peers, friends, and their families, especially their parents. The role of the father has been traditionally centered around that of the provider, and much less as the caretaker, which has been usually reserved for women. However, at the turn of modern times, especially in the Western world, dads are becoming more active in the lives of their children, and my own father was no exception. My dad would make the best of his time with me and my siblings, despite often coming home tired from work. He would still try to allocate hours spent playing video games or playing outside at the park. And, as mentioned before, he is responsible for my talent and love of cooking. It is times like those that I've grown to become nostalgic over my childhood memories with my dad. Siblings serve as a form of attachment, learning, and in some cases, as an additional caretaker. And as is the case with me and my 10 siblings, I have no shortage of each role. As is the case with my older siblings, I remember often looking to them for guidance, especially when my parents would put them in charge over me. I wanted to embody their mannerisms, wear their clothes, be friends with their friends, and annoy them when I had the chance. With my younger siblings, As a child, I deeply hated the fact that I was no longer the baby, where I could enjoy the block of the attention and focus that was now being stolen away. However, as I got older, I became more aware and more protective over them, hoping to serve as a role model, just in the same way as my older siblings had done for me. Toddlerhood is also often the stage in which the formation of relationships outside of the immediate family are made, often with companions of the same age range, and usually in the form of peer play. I remember one of my very first friendships that I made was with a girl named Angelique through the form of simple social play, which is done through the interaction of exchanging smiles, laughs, and toys. Even today, we maintain this 14-year-long friendship, but now, instead of sharing toys, we just share gossip. Once the emotional volatility of toddlerhood settles, children continue to make advances in their ability to better regulate their emotions. Kids at this stage are more empathetic and conform better with the moral behavior of their cultural settings and have begun to understand gender roles. Emotional self-regulation is the ability to have control over your emotions and is considered one of the major developmental tasks of early childhood. Such self-restraint is obviously crucial to the development of future relationships. In my experience, I remember vividly crying in front of a stranger's door after being teased by my older sister on Halloween in front of her friends. I just remember bawling my eyes out and making a mess of myself all over the floor. After coming to my senses later on, I realized how embarrassing I must have been and how in the future, a tantrum of such magnitude in public in front of people was socially unacceptable, and that regulating and restraining my emotions was more appropriate. In early childhood, kids gain a better detailed and more complex understanding of the rules and expectations of their culture, and thus their moral development advances. These rules and expectations are learned, usually by unknowingly violating them and observing the consequences that befall their shortcomings. For example, I remember beckoning to my grandma with a curled finger towards myself before being immediately scolded for it. Apparently, in Filipino culture, doing such a gesture to someone is akin to flipping someone off, as it's seen as an action reserved to call over only dogs. All cultures distinguish specific roles and expectations of men and women in society. As for myself, being raised by an Asian family in a Western setting, I was often pushed and obligated to like boy things, from being forced to get the boy toy for my Happy Meal or learning that my favorite color being pink was wrong, as it was only for girls. My dad specifically pushed me to be active in sports, such as football and swimming, and often discouraged me from watching shows like the Powderpuff Girls or playing with my sister's dolls in his attempt to make me a man. As it stands today, his approach didn't work out too well, but nonetheless, I know he's still proud of how I turned out anyways. That concludes my presentation. Thank you so much for listening, Dr. Malek. If you got here that far, I really appreciate you. It is currently 11:30 p.m. the night that this is due, and I'm only re-recording all of this because all my audio was just blank, and I'm having a very big mental breakdown right now, but I'm getting through it. So yeah, thank you so much for listening. Anyways, I hope you enjoy. Goodbye.